Good evening, English 8. This is the first video in lecture that I'll be giving for you today. I would like to first start off by going over the questions for The Outsiders, chapters 10, 11, and 12. So these were the chapter questions that you were supposed to work on over spring break. I don't expect you to have those handed in to me. We're just going to go over them like we've been doing in class. So please listen through these questions, make sure that you have answers similar to this, and we will carry on with our next lecture a little later today. So chapter 10, question 1, how does Ponyboy's dreaming or lying to himself finally work in this chapter? So we're talking about Ponyboy, and he's trying to convince himself that Johnny isn't dead. And for a while that does work. He starts wandering around through the community, he's trying to pretend that he's the one who caused Bob to die. You even see that when he's talking to Randy later on in different chapters, he's saying, well, no, I'm the one who killed Bob, not Johnny. And Randy keeps trying to say, well, no, you were drowning. It was your friend who had the switchblade. So Ponyboy, he's trying to convince himself that Johnny is alive. And for Johnny to be alive, that would mean that Ponyboy would have had to do some of these things that Johnny actually did. Reality starts hitting home for Ponyboy when he gets home from wandering around the streets and he realizes no one's celebrating after winning in the Rumble against the Soaks. And that's when he realizes that Johnny is dead, and he tells everyone, and that's part of how Ponyboy starts realizing that he's dreaming, he's lying to himself, and that the truth is Johnny has actually passed away. So question number 2, why was Johnny's dying so difficult for Dally to handle? Johnny was one of the only things that Dally really cared about. You remember that Dally didn't have a good home life. He was already in prison as a teenager. His parents didn't care what was happening to him. But Johnny was one of the things that he did care about. So when he learned that Johnny had passed away and there was nothing that Dally could have done to save Johnny, that was too much for Dally to handle. And you'll remember from reading the story, Dally went on to go rob in a grocery store. Which leads us to question 3. Why do you think Dally would have wanted to die? Again, like I just said, one of the only things that Dally really cared about was Johnny. For Dally, losing Johnny made the world not worth living in anymore. Dally knew that he wasn't going to become a better person like Johnny or Ponyboy, and he wasn't going to be able to become smart enough to escape his social class like Ponyboy could. He wasn't even going to be athletic enough to get a scholarship the way that Derry almost did at the beginning of the novel. Dally also didn't have a supportive family, and that lack of connection with anyone that really cared about him anymore made it seem as though his life wasn't worth living. So for Dally, it made sense for him to try and kill himself because there wasn't anything left for him to live for. Moving on to chapter 11, question number 1. Explain why Ponyboy might rather have anyone's hate than their pity. Pity would make Ponyboy feel embarrassed about where he comes from and who he is. So if you pity someone, you feel bad for them, it makes that person feel like it's something that they should be embarrassed about. So pity would make it seem like if Ponyboy wasn't a greaser, he wouldn't have turned out the way he did or been in such bad situations as he'd been, and that maybe if he had been a Soak, he wouldn't have been in those fights to begin with, and that meant that he and Johnny wouldn't have been in the church and Johnny would still be alive. So Ponyboy's going to have all that guilt. He's going to have all that guilt. If he feels pitied by people, then it feels like he's not being held accountable for his actions. It feels like people are just feeling sorry for him, and he doesn't want people to feel sorry for him because then he feels like he's not being treated respectfully. Ponyboy would rather people hate him because at least that way he can be proud of who he is instead of feeling like he has to be embarrassed about who he is. He can take ownership of what's happened and he can start to move past in that grief that he has. Question number 2. What do you think is going on with Ponyboy when he says Johnny didn't have anything to do with Bob's getting killed? And this goes back to what we were saying in chapter 10 about Ponyboy dreaming or lying to himself. And Ponyboy is trying to make Johnny look like a better person. Remember that everyone in the gang treated Johnny like this pet that they needed to protect. Taking the blame for Johnny's actions is another way of trying to protect Johnny even though he's dead. It makes Johnny seem more pure and innocent, which is how the gang tends to see him. So by lying about this, Ponyboy is trying to make it seem like Johnny was a better person and that he was innocent of all of those crimes, trying to make him look like he was as gold as Johnny wanted Ponyboy to stay. Alright, chapter 12. So question number 1. Why doesn't Ponyboy feel scared when the Soaks approach him and he threatens them with a broken bottle? How is this a dramatic change from the Ponyboy we've seen up until this point? So at this point in the story, everything that Ponyboy has went through in the previous weeks made him realize that he doesn't want to be afraid of the Soaks anymore. He knows that they're just people too, and that Ponyboy is tired of the way that they think they're better than everyone because of where they live and their social class and how they have money and all these other things that the Greasers don't have. He remembers talking to Cherry about how they're just people and they both like in sunsets. They're all humans, but there's this class conflict where the Soaks think they're better, and Ponyboy is tired of it. He doesn't want to have these fights anymore. He's seen how pointless these fights are, that Randy and the Soaks, they said, even if the Greasers won that fight, nothing is going to change. And I think Ponyboy really got that in a way that some of the other Greasers didn't. That winning that fight didn't make the Greasers not become Greasers anymore, and it didn't change the fundamental imbalance in society between those two groups. So the fighting and all of that conflict, it didn't change anything. It was pointless. Why continue having it? Why continue having these fights? And Ponyboy was just fed up and said, if you want to continue having those fights, I'm going to finish them in the quickest way possible. We also know that Ponyboy isn't typically violent. He's not someone who likes to fight. He questioned all of the other Greasers, well, why do you like to fight? Ponyboy never really answered that question for himself. He couldn't figure out why he likes to fight. He didn't figure out why he needed to fight. He just knew it was something he had to do. So it's something that he hasn't figured out for himself yet, and that's why it's such a dramatic change from his behavior. Question number 2. What does Derry mean when he says, you don't just stop living because you lose someone? So Derry is really trying to say here that losing someone can be painful, but you have to keep trying to carry on with your lives. Derry knows that it was painful to lose Johnny and Dally in the same day. By giving up on everything that you care about, like Ponyboy's schooling or his track or even just taking care of himself, doesn't show respect for the people that died. It just shows that you're stuck. And you're stuck wallowing in your feelings and you can't move past it, and you can't recover from that if you're still stuck. And that goes back again to Ponyboy lying about what happened with Johnny. Ponyboy felt responsible for it. He still felt guilty about it. He needs to move past that, and you can't really move past that guilt or any of those feelings associated with what happened with Johnny until you start moving on. You start acknowledging that Johnny is dead, Dally is dead, there's nothing you can do about it, and you have to try and live your life as well as you could from that point on. The last question that we had was, what do we learn was so special about Johnny? And really what we learned here was that Johnny was the only one in the group who really listened and understood everyone, even though he hadn't experienced very much of life yet. Johnny admitted that he's never left the neighborhood, he hadn't done any of the things that he wanted to do, but he still understood people on that fundamental level. He listened to people, he cared about what was happening with the other Greasers, even though they couldn't really do anything to reciprocate. They couldn't help him, but he felt that he was providing some kind of emotional service and friendship support by listening to other people's problems. Johnny was also the only one of the Greasers that was really content with his life, even though he knew he was going to die. Ponyboy is still upset because he's a Greaser. Soda Pop is upset because his girlfriend left him and won't marry him. Derry is still dreaming of all the things that he could have done if he had gone to college. Dally, of course, killed himself by robbing that grocery store and getting the cops to shoot him. And even Steve and Two-Bit, they don't seem like they're happy with their life. They know that that is their situation. They're going to be Greasers and they're going to be considered less respectable than other members of society. And they haven't made peace with that fact. But Johnny, even though he knew he was going to die, he seemed okay with where he was in life. He seemed happy that he had made the choices he had, and he was okay with what happened next. So I hope this gives you a little bit of information about what we were looking for going into those last few chapters. please stay tuned. There will be a couple more video lectures coming today, one on theme and one just doing a brief talk about our next reading, which is going to be Shakespeare's A Midsummer Night's Dream. Thank you very much, and I'll see you soon.